This movie's going to be hard to review.
Where am I?
What?
Who are you?
I'm me. This is my place. Who are you?
I'm Dr. Stephen Strange, Master of Mystic Arts. Kid, I need you to be specific. What reality is this? The multiverse is at stake.
Well, sorry. How do I know you're the real Strange?
Does this not give it away? The fact I just appeared, or I possess the Eye of Agamotto?
Well, all I mean is like, well, who's that?
Now this is where it gets confusing. No, he's not Strange. I'm Doctor Strange.
No. I'm Strange.
No, I kind of gathered that, but I'm the real Dr. Stephen Strange.
I'm Strange too. Did he just speak?
Yeah, he just spoke.
Weirder things have happened, kid. Like that faker's accent.
Alright, this is getting out of hand, and who are you?
I'm the Strange Doctor.
Alright.
This is getting ridiculous. You're fakes. You're all fakes.
Fake? The only thing fake in here is this thing.
Hey, say that to my face.
He did.
Yeah, well, I wasn't listening.
This is getting absolutely ridiculous. I mean,
Oh, please, you're going to criticise
them over me.
You think you're such a big shot with your record?
None of
you wear any gloves.
My cousin Brian started putting a toy on the camera and started doing everything to say voice for him as well. This is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Released in 2022, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness sees Benedict Cumberbatch return once again as Doctor Strange in a story that sees him trying to protect a young girl who can travel the multiverse. This time directed by Spider-Man alumni Sam Raimi and written by Michael Waldron, who most people know as the writer from Loki. The movie also stars Elizabeth Olsen, Xochitl Ejiofor, Rachel McAdams, Benedict Wong, and introduces Xochitl Gomez as America Chavez. Oh my god, it's been since 2016 since Doctor Strange actually had his own movie, and I'm really amazed that's the case because he's been such an integral part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe since then that honestly he hasn't really been off the screen for that long, so it is really strange how it's taken this long to actually get a movie that is completely focused on him considering how important he is. Strange is one of those characters that I've always been quite intrigued by. I've always liked magic and mysticism, and he definitely falls into that wheelhouse. When they first announced all these different movies that were going to be coming out over like the 2016 era, Doctor Strange was on the list. That was the one that I was most excited about seeing because it was something that I'd never really seen integrated into the Marvel Universe before, and I liked that it seemed to be going more towards like a horror angle, and there was going to be a bit more of a weirder, trippy sort of vibe to it. And even though it definitely does follow through on a lot of the trippier stuff, I don't really feel like it was as horrifying as I think it was sort of built up to be. But then they announced that this movie was coming out and it was going to be a bit more horror oriented, with the unfortunate departure of Scott Derrickson and Sam Raimi coming in. Most fans of Marvel Comics movies will probably be aware was the guy that directed the first 3 Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire. It was really interesting to see what it was that they were supposedly going to be doing with this movie. And throughout 2021 through to now 2022, the story that they've been building up over these past few editions into the MCU Phase 4 have all been leading up to a multiversal story. Really, it started off more with Loki, like not as WandaVision as everyone thought it was going to be. And Loki's kind of set the stage for everything that's happened. It ended, spoilers, with a variant of Kang the Conqueror getting killed off, He Who Remains. That basically like splits open the multiverse, and the multiverse is now a thing that exists, and that's why things like Spider-Man No Way Home and now Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness are able to happen. So this does feel like it was going to be, or at least it was pitched as, the exploration of the multiverse. And with shows like Loki, WandaVision and the Spider-Man as well, there was a lot of new additions that were brought into it, and there was a lot of alternate versions of the characters and possibilities that were opening up. So there was a lot of hype and a lot of expectation going into this movie. I think that it's both great and kind of bad at the same time. I will talk a little bit about fan expectations and things like that a little bit later on, because it is something that I do want to kind of bring up. One thing that I am going to also stress is that this is going to be spoiler free. I'm not going to be spoiling anything for the movie in this one. What I will say is, when I do get around to doing my spoiler review, which will be in the next few days or so, what I'm going to be talking about in that is the spoilers that were online, the leaks, the way that fans kind of responded to it, general things like that, because I do feel like it is something that does need to be talked about a little bit. So starting off, we're going to talk a little bit about the performances. The lead performer is Benedict Cumberbatch once again. Honestly, I genuinely love him as Doctor Strange. I think he just has this natural ability to just show who this character is, because not only does he sort of play like the normal Strange that we've seen before, he plays 3 different versions of this character. All this stuff is in the trailers, so don't worry, I'm not ruining anything. And each one feels very distinct from each other, and I think that Cumberbatch is genuinely really good in each role. It's really become a bit of a recurring thing that Cumberbatch has now played the hero and villain in so many different movies in the same film, and it is just really strange how that's happened so many times now, but he is genuinely great in each role. The only downside to what happens with Strange in this movie is that there's so many other characters that are part of it, and there's so much focus on other things that he does kind of get a little bit overshadowed. Even though like it is great having Strange being front and centre, he still does feel like he's just kind of like one little part of it. Even though his name is in the title and he's the one sort of like trying to guide the story, I don't think that he's necessarily as protagonisty as I think most people are thinking he's going to be. There is so much that is going on, there's so much focus of different things in this movie that it is really hard to say that this is just Strange's movie. Because one of the other biggest focuses on in this movie is Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. She is genuinely brilliant in this role. I have absolutely loved her in this role from all the way back in Age of Ultron. It's been great seeing her character evolve and change with each movie. Where they've gone with her in this movie, I think that it's something that I have wanted to see from her for a long time, but I don't necessarily think that this is the direction that they should have gone with her character just yet. It feels a little bit rushed, and considering the way that WandaVision was sort of centred around one aspect of her character growth, it felt like a really sharp change for her character. I'm not quite sure on the characterisation, but in terms of performance, I think Elizabeth Olsen is definitely one of the best performers in the MCU. Very quickly, I've just got to mention the way that I sort of structure a lot of these reviews. One of the things that I tend to do is I normally sort of talk about the heroes and then I go into like the villain later on, but considering this is a movie where they haven't really revealed who the villain is in any of the marketing, it is really hard for me to actually sort of stick to that sort of structure and not give anything away. I'm just going to be talking about the characters randomly. I'm not necessarily going to be sort of revealing anything too much. I'm not going to be talking about the villain or the motivations of the villain or anything like that in this. I will be doing that in the spoiler review, so keep an eye out for that when that comes out. One of the newest additions to this movie is Xochitl Gomez as America Chavez. She is actually quite a good addition to this movie. I'm not really familiar with her character. Like, this is kind of getting into the territory of like, I sort of know the name and I might sort of recognise them. I don't really know much about them. This is kind of nice, actually, not really having any sort of expectations for who her character is. I was sort of aware that what her character is able to do, because basically what she's able to do is punch a hole into different universes, and it like creates like this gigantic star shape, and she's able to like jump through from multiverse to multiverse, from universe to universe. So it is a really visually interesting character, and I think that, I don't know if she's done many other projects. I think she's only done like a few TV things here and there, so this is a really great introduction for her into not only the Marvel Cinematic Universe but cinema as well, because I think she is a genuinely great actress, and I do think that she does play this role really well. But on top of that, we also get a few returning Doctor Strange performers as well, like with Xochitl Ejiofor and Rachel McAdams and Benedict Wong. Again, they're all genuinely really great in their roles. I think Rachel McAdams has definitely enhanced her role a lot more this time around, because she was kind of out the way in the first movie. She only really sort of had appearances like quite early on and then later in the film. It is nice having her having a bit more of a prominent role this time. I think that she is genuinely great. And then the same time with Benedict Wong, who's been popping up throughout all the movies in Phase 4 so far, and I genuinely love Wong in these movies. It's nice seeing that he's kind of contrasting this character a bit from what we've seen quite recently with like Shang-Chi and things like that, because he's been a bit more comedic and a bit funnier. It is nice actually seeing him start to be a bit more serious this time around, because that is more like what he was when we first were introduced to him. So it is really nice having him being a bit more like that, but he still has a few of those comedic elements to him. And then when it comes to Xochitl as Mordo in this movie, I think I am actually quite disappointed with him in this movie, because without really sort of getting into spoilers, it is odd what sort of direction that they actually sort of went with him. It sort of feels like there's motivation that was done off screen that we don't really get to see. They sort of mention something about his character and it's like, wait, what? When was that addressed? So it is quite odd having that sort of thrown in there for no reason. He's not really in the movie as much as you'd think he would be, and I feel like it is really disappointing that they don't really sort of do much with him. When it comes to the story for this movie, I saw a lot of reviews just before I saw the movie basically saying that the plot's quite thin. I was thinking that it probably will make a bit more sense, because you know there's so much going on in this film that it probably makes the most logical sense to have it be a bit more streamlined and not just like jump all over the place. I do kind of see what they mean, because the basic plot for this movie is just Doctor Strange trying to protect America Chavez from this villain that's hunting her throughout the multiverse. Now, it is great, it is a good action-packed story. It does provide a lot of tension and a lot of drama as well. It just feels like there's a lot more that they could have done. This is a multiverse story. This is about travelling through different universes and dimensions. Honestly, it sort of feels like it's a little bit more of an afterthought in a way, because it doesn't feel as central to the plot as you'd think. It is really strange why this is called Multiverse of Madness, and they don't really travel to that many universes, so I think that it is a strange decision for them to have actually done that, considering this is kind of what the whole movie's kind of built around. Because if you have watched things like Loki, you know that that's kind of building to something, and majority of people who were going into this were expecting this to kind of build off of everything that happened there. And there are elements of it, but they don't really focus on it that much, because it is mainly focused on Strange protecting America. That's really the main plot. And I do need to say that because this is kind of a movie that does kind of build off of things in the past, I don't think that this is a movie that you could just go into and not have seen anything beforehand, because there is so much that they are building off of. You do need to see things like the Doctor Strange movie. You need to see all the stuff with Wanda as well to sort of understand where she is now, including WandaVision, plus Loki and Spider-Man No Way Home, because this is something that does benefit from having prior experience. I sort of feel a little sorry for anyone who is trying to start to get into the MCU now, because there's so much that's come out over the years now, and there's so many movies and now TV shows that you've got to catch up on to try and get up to date. And honestly, I really feel sorry for people who are just getting into it. There's so much now that you need to understand for this point in time that it is really hard to catch up, and I can understand why some people will be put off by that. But when it comes to just the main story itself, I do think that this is something that people can just get on board with, and I do think it is easy enough to follow, considering this kind of bills more as Doctor Strange exploring the multiverse. I think in that regards it's disappointing, because there's not enough travelling the multiverse. We get a few different ones, but that's really it. And honestly, I was just sort of expecting a bit more from it. There's so many possibilities that they could have had for this film. There's so much expectations from fans, from the marketing, all sorts that were building this movie up, and they don't really do much with it. But having said that, I did admire the amount of secrecy that was surrounding this movie, like disregarding all the leaks and everything. The way that they tried to keep as many secrets as possible for this movie was genuinely impressive. Considering the last movie that we had before this was Spider-Man No Way Home, and the amount of things that people knew about that film going into it, I mean, not even before the movie was even really starting to come out, it was just horrific how much was coming out about that movie. So it was really nice how they were trying to keep as much secret as possible. Honestly, it was nice just going into a movie and not really knowing too much about it. But having said that, yes, there were things that did leak online. This is something that I was really quite annoyed with, because the movie was released on the 4th of May in certain areas of the world. For us in the UK, it was the 5th of May, so we had like a whole day of waiting for this movie to come out. And it was a bit of a problem, because there were things that were starting to get leaked online, plus the premiere as well a couple of days earlier. I don't know whether it was because of the premiere or what, but there was footage, there were pictures all sorts that were getting leaked online a couple of days before the film came out. I don't know where they came from, whether it was from the premiere, whether it was the press screenings, whether it was the fans who got to see it on opening day in the other countries. We don't know. There was so much that was getting revealed, and there was so many spoilers online that honestly it was quite disheartening that fans were just going like, hey, guess what happens? And it just blows the surprises for you. Now, I do understand you get excited and you want to talk about things with people, but let people experience them. It's not hard. Why would you want to deprive that of somebody from who wants to experience this experience that you had, and you've now ruined it for someone? I just can't understand that at all. I am somebody who has had movies ruined for me in the past, and it is really annoying. It takes you out of it because you know the surprises. You aren't shocked or anything, and people wonder why, like, oh, why weren't you surprised with this? Well, because someone told me. And it is really irritating, and that does extend to this movie because I had 2 things ruined for me, rather unfortunately, and he has apologised. I have a friend who did send a picture that unfortunately turned out to be real and kind of blew a big surprise in this movie. And then another thing that I do every so often is I'm just sort of checking on this channel, just checking that my Star Wars reviews are being uploaded properly. I got a notification about something, so I went on it, and then one of the videos that popped up on the home page was a big spoiler for this movie, and my God, I was so angry with it, because why was I getting recommended this video? Yeah, I wasn't really having the best time before the movie came out, so I wasn't really too surprised or shocked with a lot of things that happened in this film. I'm going to try putting that to the back of my mind, and I'm just going to be talking about the movie as it is that I saw. So let's start off with the visuals. So obviously we had Sam Raimi coming back to direct this movie, and it is interesting seeing how he has adapted into the MCU, because this is very much a Sam Raimi movie and it's billed as a Sam Raimi movie. So there are a lot of visual elements that he has used from other projects like The Evil Dead and Spider-Man. He's incorporated them into the MCU, but the MCU does have a bit of a, I wouldn't necessarily say a structure, but there is certain things that they do a lot with their movies that do make an appearance in this, but I do feel like this is something that is very different. This does have a very unique style to it, and that is benefited from having Sam Raimi, because he does have a very unique vision and a style that when you compare it to a lot of the stuff that's happened in the MCU, this does feel very different. But there are a lot of elements that have been done before, and it is something that I did notice, and I don't know many people who actually have, because I have been talking to a few people and they haven't really sort of noticed this until I've mentioned it, and they've gone, oh yeah, there's definitely sequences that are very much from things like Spider-Man 2. There are scenes that are definitely out of The Evil Dead. There's stuff out of Scott Pilgrim as well. You'll know exactly which scene I mean when I mention that. But it is really odd, because it seems like what they were trying to do was try to make a Sam Raimi movie. But I don't know if it was maybe them letting him have complete freedom to sort of make the movie that he wanted to, or whether it was, can you make a Sam Raimi movie like these ones? Sometimes it does feel a little bit on the nose at times, and I feel like sometimes I think that it's just there to just be something visually interesting, and there's a bit of shock value as well. A lot of it has been done before, but I suppose that is going to happen eventually, because there's so many different movies like this out there now. Yeah, they are definitely going to start like borrowing elements from other things, whether it's intentional or not. You know, like quite early on there's a scene where Doctor Strange is fighting off this gigantic octopus creature called Gargantos. It sort of plays out a bit like the Spidey Doc Ock fight from Spider-Man 2, because it involves them going up the side of a building. It's just the way that it's sort of shot and the way that they're sort of doing a few things here and there, and it was just like, that sort of feels a bit like that movie. To the point where I was like, are they going to do it? Yeah, they're doing that. Are they going to do it? Yeah, they're doing that. It sort of takes the unpredictability out of it a little bit, and it does kind of extend through into the horror of this movie, because this movie definitely is a horror. I would say that this is classed as a horror, 12A1, but it does have those elements to it, the way that some of the shots are made. There's a lot of Dutch angles, and there's lots of like quiet moments, and there's a lot of tension that's built up over time, a lot of quite nasty imagery, and there are a lot of jump scares as well, which they didn't really bother me too much, because weirdly I am somebody who doesn't really like horror movies, and I was a little bit nervous about going into this movie, because as I don't want to see a horror movie. But jump scares didn't actually get me that much, and it was a really strange thing because I could sort of see where it was all going. And of course, when the jumps happened, I was just like, oh, okay. There was about 3 teenagers sitting behind me, and I don't think they've seen many horror movies in the past because I could feel my chair going every so often. So I will say that the jump scares are handled well. I do think that this is definitely Sam Raimi in full-on horror mode, and I think that it is handled well. I do think the tension is definitely there. I do think that it is shot really well. This is definitely one of the most visually interesting movies in the MCU. The flair that Sam Raimi does bring to it does make something really unique. I just mentioned that it was rated as 12. Over here in the UK it's rated a 12A, which means that you have to be 12 years or older to see it. But if you're under 12, it means you have to be accompanied by an adult. I don't think that 12-year-olds should be seeing this one, and I don't think that little kids should be going in to see this one, because I am genuinely shocked how graphic this film actually can be. It's not ridiculously gory, but there are definitely some really shocking moments that I don't think I've actually seen in a 12A movie, because honestly it's not something that I ever thought you'd ever put in a 12A. Over in the United States it is rated a PG-13. Again, I don't find that too shocking considering one of Sam Raimi's last movies was something called Drag Me to Hell, and that's a pretty disturbing horror movie, and I'm really surprised how that is meant for like 13-year-olds in the US, because that's definitely not for kids. So my recommendation is that if you are a parent or you have somebody who is quite young, who is a fan of Marvel Comics, who does want to see this movie, it really depends on what they can handle, because I do think that this is a lot more graphic than you probably expect it to be. I do think that there are going to be elements that I think will be quite disturbing for younger viewers. I said those teenagers who are sitting behind me probably don't have a lot of experience with horror movies, but look at it. When some of the more shocking elements happen, I could just hear them going, whoa! That's pretty good for a UK movie. We're not really so vocal over here. Like, if you ever watch those audience reactions on YouTube, just honestly listen to the ones from like the US and then listen to the ones from the UK. They're very different. Us in the UK are starting to get a bit more rowdy, but we're not really that bad. It's just like, you'll hear us laughing if there's a joke or something that is funny. That's really it. You won't really hear much else from us, but if it's like opening day for a brand new movie, then you're more likely to hear us being a bit more vocal. A lot of the videos that I've seen for the US, I don't know how you actually watch movies because it's so loud and it just drowns out the audio. Honestly, I'm quite happy that we are a little bit quieter, because I would like to actually hear everything that's going on. As I said, it is nice having that sort of experience and having people who genuinely are passionate and excited about a movie, and it is great having that opening night buzz as well. People who made it have said that it was movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom and Gremlins and Poltergeist, because they are all rated PG-13 in the US. Poltergeist are 15 over here. The other ones are all 12s, and they sort of fit comfortably in that because they're not too extreme, but they're just edgy enough that they could potentially get an older rating. You can definitely sort of feel that, but I think that this movie is just a tiny bit more graphic than some of those, and I do think that there are some really shocking elements in this movie. Sometimes I do think that it is just for shock factor, to the point where I don't know if it necessarily is justified in a way at times, because there are definitely some moments in this that do sort of feel like they kind of come out of nowhere and are just unnecessarily over the top. But it is still a Sam Raimi movie, so there are definitely elements that are a bit lighter, and it does have that sort of campy sort of tone that he had with the Spider-Man movies, so it's not too extreme at times. So it does feel more like what he would do with like a superhero movie like this. It does borrow elements of things like The Evil Dead and Spider-Man. It does feel like a mixture of the two. Without spoiling anything, there are definitely little things that Sam Raimi does sort of sprinkle in most of his movies that do make appearances in this. I do like how they are incorporated, and I do feel like they are in place with what happens in the movie. When it comes to the overall pace for this movie, I do feel like this is quite fast. It's a movie that is 2 hours 4, something like that, 2 hours 5. It does seem like that is a really short time for this movie, because there's so much that they're trying to do, and there's so many things that happen in it that just feel really rushed, and I think that it is something that needed to be extended out a lot more. They have actually admitted that there's like 35-40 odd minutes that was cut from this movie, I am kind of aware that that's now the case. It does feel quite rushed, and it does feel like there are a lot of things that do happen and there's not really a lot of build up to. There are definitely moments of characterization in here, and there are moments where they do sort of let the characters just sort of sit down and just sort of breathe, but it does seem like it's in a bit more of a rush to be like, okay, now we need to sort of clean this up and on to the next bit. And there's a lot of different action scenes that do need to be added into this. I do feel like maybe they should have just sort of slowed down a little bit, and that really extends into the villain as well, because there is a really good motivation and there is a clear direction that the villain is going in for this movie, but I just feel like it is really fast. They could have built it up a bit more. This is still an MCU movie, so there is a lot of action that is injected into this film. Honestly, it is genuinely really good. The action sequences in this movie are really well made. They are really well handled. We've seen little brief glimpses of things that like Strange and Wanda can do in the past. Having them getting to sort of like show off a lot more of their abilities this time around is really visually interesting. There is a wide variety of different action sequences in this, and they are really imaginative, and I think that they are done really well. They are quite violent at times as well. This is definitely one of the more violent films in the MCU. Some of the action scenes are probably some of the best scenes in the movie. There are some genuinely great sequences. That's definitely enhanced by a lot of the effects that they use as well, because the effects are pretty good in this movie. I don't think they're the best they've ever been in a Marvel film before, but I do think that they do fit well into the movie. They don't take you out of it at all. The way that a lot of the characters' powers are utilised is really good, and they are visually represented really well. Nothing feels completely out of place or too cartoony or unrealistic. There are a couple little moments here and there, but honestly, it won't bother you. The effects are genuinely really good in this movie, and I think that especially with the environments as well, every place that they visit does feel quite unique and different. It is a combination of both the CG effects. I don't know if they used the volume or not in this movie. I don't think they did, because I think they were filming in London for a lot of it. I imagine that they did do a few more practical sets, and they did actually go out and film on the streets and stuff like that. It is a good mixture of the two. Backgrounds, environments, the effects in general are genuinely pretty good. The costumes are also pretty good in this film, because they do still look quite similar to what they had in the previous Doctor Strange movie, but they do feel very different as well. Like, Strange is definitely wearing a different costume this time around, and I really like it. It is kind of an odd choice why the Eye of Agamotto's now back. They don't really explain it, but it is really nice actually having that more comic book costume. Most of the costumes are represented really well, and I do like how America Chavez's costume is pretty much straight out of the comics, and I do like how they have integrated that. And then similarly with Wanda as well, because it is an odd choice why they did give her like a super costume at the end of WandaVision. Honestly, she looked absolutely brilliant in that series, absolutely gorgeous as well. It is really strange how they've sort of changed it a little bit in this movie. There might be an explanation for it that I don't really want to get into on here. It is strange how they sort of set her up to look one way, and then she looks quite different in this one, especially with like the makeup and everything. Even like the crown that she's got on, it's subtly different, so I don't really understand why that is. All the costumes are genuinely great, and I genuinely do love how a lot of them are represented. This is something that Marvel has been doing quite recently. You know, we've even had like the trailer for Thor: Love and Thunder. We are getting more comic accurate costumes. Honestly, they do look genuinely great on screen, and honestly, like, all the people who've been working on the designs, the people who are making them, they've all done a genuinely fantastic job over the years, and I think that the costumes now in Phase 4 are some of the best that they've ever been. That wouldn't be a Sam Raimi superhero movie without a certain someone coming back to do the music. This is honestly one of the best soundtracks that I think Danny Elfman has done in a long time. I can't think of the last movie that he's really done. He sort of pops up every now and again these days. It is strange contrasting that to like the early 2000s and 90s and 80s, because he was genuinely one of the go-to guys of Hollywood, and some of his soundtracks are incredibly iconic, so it is great actually having him come back for this one and having him actually creating something that's very different from what we had in the first movie, but it still has a lot of callbacks to not only Doctor Strange but other movies and TV shows as well, and it is really well done. I do love the soundtrack for this movie. It definitely has the superhero sort of quality to it, and Doctor Strange's theme is in here. They don't just completely push it to the side as they kind of do with a lot of the sequels in the MCU. It does sound very unique. There's definitely a lot more horror tone to it as well, especially like the main theme. There's definitely a lot of like the horrorness to it, but it does sound very Danny Elfman as well. There are definitely elements that you will listen to, and if you didn't know that he was doing the soundtrack for this, you will know that he did. I mean, I'll really sort of spoil it. There is a sequence where they do actually focus a lot on the music. I've seen some people being a bit divisive with it online. I really liked how that scene plays out, and I do think that it does fit the movie for me, and it is visually quite interesting, and I think that the music that they use throughout that scene is genuinely great. So honestly, that scene didn't bother me, and I think that it really was something really unique. I mentioned a little earlier that there's a lot of expectations and anticipation around this movie, and I feel like a lot of people are really bigging this up to be something so much more than it actually is. My biggest recommendation is do not go into this with ridiculously high expectations, because you will be disappointed. The amount of fan theories, all these different ideas that people are coming out with is just, it's too much. And I do feel like some people are really setting themselves up to be disappointed. Learn from things like WandaVision. People were thinking that that series was going to build up to something absolutely huge, and it wasn't. It was just like this really personal story all about the Scarlet Witch's grief. That's more like what the story is for this one. It's very much centred around Strange and America Chavez. You will be disappointed if you are expecting so much to happen in it. I don't mind theorising and getting excited about the possibilities of a movie. There were definitely ideas that I had for this film. The marketing definitely didn't help with that, because there were definitely things that they did show that they probably shouldn't have. Even Kevin Feige has said that they shouldn't have actually put a lot of that stuff in the trailer. So it did sort of build up this expectation of what the movie was going to be, but that's not really what it was. I do think that if you are somebody who has so many theories about who or what is going to be in this movie, you will be disappointed. A friend of mine said, just go into this thinking that it's a Doctor Strange movie. That is the perfect way of going into this. Go into this expecting a sequel to Doctor Strange. I was also sort of expecting it to be a lot madder than it was, and there definitely are elements of that here and there, and I think that, especially with the way that Sam Raimi's done it, there are definitely elements that could have been a bit further, and I do think that they could have pushed the madness aspect of it a bit more. They don't really go all out into it, so I was sort of hoping that they would do a bit more. There is definitely one thing that I would have liked them to have done. I do feel like this could have benefited from another antagonist. I think that the villain that they have does work quite well, but there's not enough sort of build up towards it, and I feel like there should have been some sort of external force being a part of this as well. That's something that I would have liked to have seen them really sort of do, so that's all I'm really going to say. I'll get into that in the spoiler review. But overall, I do think that this is a genuinely good movie. I think that the visuals are really impressive. I think the music's great. I think the performances from everyone are genuinely brilliant, especially Elizabeth Olsen. Most aspects of this genuinely do work, and when it's allowed to be more of like a horror movie, I think that it does really excel a lot more. Even though they are a very different contrast to what we've seen in the MCU, those are the elements that do work best for me, because it is very different from what we've seen, and they're also a lot more, I want to say a bit more competent in a way, because this is definitely what Sam Raimi does, and it's what he's a lot more confident doing. But there are definitely elements of familiarity that most people will be used to when it comes to the MCU. Those elements I do feel that can get a little bit tiresome, but I do feel like this is very different from what we've normally got. Tonally, I do think that this is a very different movie, and I think that as a horror movie, I'm quite happy with how they've handled it. It isn't like a really horrific horror movie I think a lot of people seem to be expecting it to be, but it is good, it is well made, and it does push a lot of boundaries for what's allowed within the age rating, especially a movie like that today. But I do think that it is a little bit rushed. I do think that either some elements could have maybe been taken out, or if those 40 minutes could have benefited it in some way, then leave them in. But yeah, it does feel a little bit rushed. It does feel like the pacing was just a little bit too fast. Honestly, I feel like they could have just handled that a little bit better. And there are definitely elements with regards to characters and plots and things like that are going to be quite divisive for people, especially fans. It really depends on what side of that you're on, whether or not you're going to really like this movie or really not. So even though there are elements that I didn't really agree with and I wasn't really happy with a few little decisions that they made, I did overall enjoy it, and I do think that this is a very unique movie in the MCU. Overall for me, I do think that this is a good movie, and my rating for this film is going to be a 7 out of 10. This isn't a fantastic movie, but I do think that this is good, and I was able to manage a lot of my expectations going into this. I didn't expect a lot of these fan theories to really turn out, but there were definitely some that I thought, yeah, this could potentially happen, so I wasn't too disappointed in that regards, but there are definitely elements that I was a bit disappointed with. That's all I've really got to say for today, so I'm gonna save the rest of what I've got to say for the spoiler review. As I said, it's going to be out within the next few days or so. Keep an eye out for that. So that's all I've really got to say for today. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on this channel. If you have any suggestions for any rewinds you want me to do, like any older movies or anything new that's coming out and you want me to do a review for, let me know down in the comments and I'll try and get around to them as soon as I possibly can. But that's all I've got to say for today's rewind review. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. See ya.